Welcome to the Garden Club. This is a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure recap of seasons 1 through 6, or parts 1 through 6, by the hosts of the Garden Club and the hosts of our new show, JoJo, which will now cover the manga portion of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, specifically where the anime is not covered at this time. That is part 7, Steel Ball Run. And so because we're going to part 7, we're going to do a recap of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure in our own words. If we miss things or get things kind of wrong, then that's kind of your problem, to be honest. But we just want to get you caught up so you can kind of know what's happening. So I'm here with my co-host, Lauren, my wife, and she's going to open up how JoJo's Bizarre Adventure starts. This is part 1, Phantom Blood.
Everything is very dark and dreary and lots of rich colors like purples and oranges and blacks. So we start off by seeing a carriage going down the road. Not really like a developed road because it's in like the 1800s. I think it's late 1800s. Carriage crashes. It's a pretty damn gnarly crash. Like, honestly, I thought everyone was dead. And then we have this group of bandits that comes across the carriage. And obviously the carriage is like fairly nice. So I think they assume these people have a lot of money. And so they come across it and they're going to kind of like pillage them, assuming that they've all died. But they come across the dad and he actually ends up being alive. And these bandits help them. Or at least it's perceived that they're helping them. So it ends up being it was a husband and wife, and then their like infant. Mom ends up dying, sadly, but the baby survives, and so does the dad. And so the dad is like so grateful to these people that he thinks has helped them that he says like, I owe you, like a very sincere owing. It's like an oath, basically. He gives an oath. And I just want to say this whole time, I'm thinking just the way it is, the way the colors look, everything like that. I'm like, there's going to be vampires. This feels very dramatic and vampire-y.
The last thing I want to add about this situation is that in the carriage that the head of the Joestar family was driving back home, basically, he was carrying an ancient mask. We don't know anything about this mask, but there's some close shots of it implying that it's important. Now, the situation has set up the two, important characters, essentially, for all of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and that's Dio Brando and just whoever the Joestar is at the time. That's because this old guy who happened to save them when he was trying to loot their car after the accident happens to be named Brando, and he ends up having a son. And the son goes on to become a very important character. The mask being here implies that there's like a type of fate between Dio Brando and the Joestar family, that they're like intertwined, and even implying possibly that this mask is what caused the accident, what ended up bringing them together. This weird situation of people that are very honorable and respectable and people who are very cunning and cutthroat. We cut pretty far into the future, and at this point, Dio Brando shows up at the Joestar mansion with like a letter, and this letter is from Dio's father, and Dio's father is the thief who tried to rob him and scam him a long time ago. Dio's father has passed away, and the letter is asking the Joestar family to take in Dio. Already at the mansion is our star, Jonathan Joestar. He's a good boy. He's smart. He's athletic. He's always trying to do the right thing. And in comes Dio, who is extremely strategic in how he does everything in his life. But he's also a deeply cruel person, even as a young kid. He immediately undermines Jonathan at every opportunity. And Jonathan's father, being the very respectable, honor-bound guy that he is, always kind of takes Dio's side because he's going through a lot of tough shit. He believes that the Joestars owe the Brandos like their lives, like they only exist because they were saved that day. And so like, let's cut this guy some slack. He's just going through a tough time, but it keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And eventually, Jonathan fights back. And Dio's hate and disgust for Jonathan turns into a weird type of respect where he knows that he's going to have to grow and change to overcome somebody like Jonathan Joestar. something terrible happens to Jonathan, something that has no explanation. His beloved dog that we've seen the entire episode, who's always there to support Jonathan, who Jonathan loves dearly, he just somehow ends up in like a furnace and gets burned alive. Like they were just doing their normal thing, and I guess he just jumped in there. But it's, if you've been watching the episode, it's obviously implied that Dio set this dog there, that he pulled a fast one on them and is going to lie or whatever to get out of this. There's no proof. What's the escalation of this? But we jump forward like almost 10 years.
And they're now in college and they're playing rugby and they're like acting like friends, like almost like best buds. They're like, oh my gosh, yeah, you're awesome at rugby, and like high five, and yeah. Then we figure out that Daddy Joestar, his health is failing considerably. At this point, Jonathan decides to go visit his dad because he thinks things are kind of weird.
He goes home and he goes up to his dad, and he's really growing very concerned and like, this is just weird. Like, you got sick so randomly and you've just been getting worse and worse, even though that you're doing all the right things. And Jonathan, while basically acting like BFFs with Dio, thinks maybe he's not my best friend. That weird shit that happened before, like, I remember that. I'm going to go find out more about Dio Brando. And so he decides to go and try to find Dio's home, which Jonathan's from a very wealthy family. And when he goes to England, he's going to the roughest, poorest, most fucked up neighborhood in London.
Jonathan gets to London, this really sketchy part of London, and meets Speedwagon. And I think Speedwagon and maybe some of his like associates or something get into a fight with Jonathan, but Jonathan beats their ass.
And by the way, this part in London, it brings up the most important character in all of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure that's not Dio or Jonathan, but also like not that important in like a whole nother way. And it's this dude named Speedwagon, who's just like the oldish man leader of these thugs. And the way that Jonathan beats their ass, he is so impressed by Jonathan and his manliness and chivalry and mercifulness that he's like, Jonathan, I'm going to follow you to the end of this world. You are my fucking hero and god. And he ends up establishing like this famous oil company that makes a shit ton of money, but then runs this expensive like secret research into like these masks and stuff later, and basically funds everything the Joestars ever need to do. And the way he just loves Jonathan, it's awesome and hilarious. It's like not important, but also like if I didn't say anything, I'd be ashamed of myself.
And then he kind of tells them like what he's there for, and finds out that Dio actually killed his father. He killed his father by slowly poisoning him, which turns out to be the same thing that he's doing to Daddy Joestar. If I'm recalling correctly, isn't there something about that really famous killer in London? I think it's Jack the Ripper.
Oh boy. So while Jonathan's doing all of this shit, Dio has been following his ass. Because you gotta remember that Dio is like this evil genius bastard. And so he follows Jonathan with the plan to kill him. He brought this mask that during their original fight, a little bit of the blood from Jonathan during the fight got onto this mask. The same mask from the accident that brought them together, that the Joestar family as archaeologists found. When the blood got on the mask as kids, we saw that it kind of came alive. It reacted by having these kind of incredibly sharp fangs come out of the rim of the mask. So Dio has the plan to kill him with the mask, to make the mask go off on Jonathan's face, react into blood, and pierce his brain. Kind of genius plan, because it's so weird. How would anybody expect that to happen? This mask is almost like romantic to them. So Dio's plan ends up going very wrong, and some other unlucky bastard gets the mask placed on them. But instead of killing them instantly, they're turned into this bloodthirsty vampire. And then the sun comes up and instantly just vaporizes the vampire.
And once this guy turns into a vampire, I turn to Brandon and go, I fucking called it. I fucking called that this was going to be about vampires. I was a Twilight girl, so of course I knew.
Yeah, you know the signs. But Dio then realizes the true power or maybe potential of the mask. Anyways, they both run back to England and they have a big confrontation. By the way, this is just like episode 3 or something. The pacing is fucking insane. And you're just like, what is happening? I kind of love it, but I also am deeply confused and unsure of where this is heading. So they go back to the mansion. Jonathan shows his daddy proof that Dio is an enemy. And this destroys Daddy Joestar because he truly does consider Dio a son. Dio arrives and he's cornered. He's lost. It's over. Speedwagon is helping them. Like, he's completely outnumbered. But in his back pocket, he has the mask and he activates the mask on himself and turns himself into a vampire. And immediately his power and regenerative abilities that he knew he would get from his encounter with a vampire back in London help him just overpower and flip the situation on its head. He's now the one in control, and he knows all he has to do is not be in the sun, and he's basically invincible. Jonathan challenges Dio even though it appears hopeless. The Joestar mansion is being burned to the ground, and Jonathan attacks Dio, and they both fall like down this fiery pit, and Jonathan pulls out some badass moves to surprise Dio by his level of growth. And Dio reminds himself what he learned long ago, that when you hit a Joestar, they get up stronger. And it appears that Dio dies, but of course he doesn't die. He's a vampire. We think that Dio goes down with the burning house. Daddy Joestar's actually gone. Jonathan Joestar has basically lost everything. And then we meet a very important person.
We meet Mr. Zappelli. And this guy is wacky. He is strange and silly and so energetic. He is very memorable. Just so you all know, this is when we get introduced to another recurring family. The Zappelli family also is woven throughout JoJo's. He introduces Jonathan to this power. It's this power that uses breath, and it's called Hammond. Now, this shit, it's kind of weird to me at first. I was like, are we getting into like some, I don't know, yogi, Buddhism? I was like, this came out of left field. But it's very powerful, very interesting.
And this power is like specifically like the enemy of the mask users, the enemy of vampires, basically. It has like the power of light itself. Like whatever light is to vampires, Hammond shares that same characteristic. And so that's why he knew about the Joestar family. That's why he knew about the potential for there to be like a vampire. So basically we get a whole Hammond training arc where Jonathan levels up and becomes a Hammond user with the eventual goal of defeating Dio together with Zappelli. So they do a whole training arc. He becomes a Hammond user, and they seek out Dio. And they basically have some decent intelligence of where he's at and how many people there might be with him, how many vampires he's created. And the people that found this out are just some basically other random Hammond users. So they confront Dio in this like mountainside town where they've noticed people have been disappearing and all this kind of stuff. And Dio's held himself up in this very kind of like Dracula-esque mansion. And they kind of strategically like attack the mansion during like the daytime.
Well, I also remember when they first get to the town, someone comes up to them and is like, help us. Like, you need to help us. Like, this crazy stuff is happening. And then it turns out that this little fucker, I guess I shouldn't say that. They ended up being turned into a vampire by Dio, and they ended up attacking them.
So, yeah, I think by the time they got there, based off of what just happened, they were like, this is worse than we thought. But they have no choice. They just decide to attack Dio's lair anyways. And they at least have the advantage that there's like sunlight out. If they could somehow get him outside, they can theoretically win. Now, there's like basically like a fuck ton of little vampire people in this thing. There's like a woman and stuff that's like captured and gonna be eaten, and there's like a little boy that they saved in the town already. That stuff doesn't really matter too much, but they have this big battle. The only thing you need to know right now is that the little boy's name is Poco, and he goes through this whole thing with them, and he lives to tell the tale. They have this big battle with Dio's henchmen and them, and they're working their way to Dio himself. Jonathan has his own vampire to fight. It's like the number 3 of the layer behind Dio and the stronger guy. And the stronger guy is fighting Zappelli in this like little room and stuff. They're not exposed to the daylight or anything. It's just a death battle in there.
And no one else can get into this room. They're like stuck on the outside of it.
It makes a very interesting fight, is what I would say. And this is like the earliest sign of what I would say is one of Araki's greatest strength, is creating these fights that have this very interesting variable thrown in. And Jonathan tries to help out Zappelli. Jonathan ends up in a situation where he's going to die. He fought valiantly. He's going to die, and he's kind of sacrificed himself to help Zappelli. But at the very last moment, Zappelli ends up sacrificing himself to help Jonathan, that he believes Jonathan is the only person that can defeat Dio, which would basically save the world in his mind. And Zappelli has this really just great death scene, and we don't really get time to stick with it for very long. And Jonathan has to go do the final confrontation with Dio. So Jonathan and Dio have their big battle, and while Dio has learned from his lessons in the past, he still is a little overconfident. And Jonathan's ability to use Hammond surprises him, and Jonathan ends up defeating him. But Dio, that clever bastard, had a backup plan because he himself respects the Joestar family to know that his victory wasn't guaranteed. And it turns out he set up like a special coffin for himself just in case. And this coffin is specifically designed to not be able to be opened from the outside and be virtually indestructible so that he can't be exposed to sunlight. That to some level there's a waiting game, even if it's hundreds and hundreds of years, that one day somebody will pick him up, open it up, and he'll be free. So someday he'll have the opportunity to open his coffin and come back out in the world, whatever that looks like for him.
And we kind of get like a skip forward, a time skip, a couple months, where Jonathan marries his like childhood or I guess teenage sweetheart, Irina. And that's something else that we forgot at the beginning was Dio was really trying to get in between Irina and Jonathan. But happy ending. They end up getting married. And they go on their honeymoon, and they're on a cruise. And lo and behold, not quite as chill as they were hoping for their honeymoon. Turns out there's fucking vampires on this bitch. And I think someone ends up burning the place down. They decide to burn the ship down to get rid of these vampires for good. But little did they know, Dio's fucking coffin is somehow on this same exact boat that they're on. And Irina ends up saving this like little baby, and Jonathan doesn't make it.
Dio emerges from the coffin and defeats Jonathan, but Jonathan, just like Dio previously, had a little backup plan, or he just created a backup plan on the fly and sinks the entire boat with him, thinking, well, you're going to eventually be exposed to sunlight because you're not going anywhere. This boat's going down. Sun's about to come up. Guess we're both going down. Kind of poetic. Now, the catch is, during their original fight in that mountainside town, Dio's body was completely destroyed and only his head was left intact. In this moment where he defeated Jonathan, he was checkmated, but he saw an opportunity to steal a new body. And he attaches his vampire-ass head to Jonathan's body, and he uses that to crawl back into his coffin and wait. Irina and the child, the random baby that she saves, they are rescued. And then that's the end of part 1, Phantom Blood. It was a wild 8 episodes.